Hello, welcome everyone to Anthropology 101 lecture. Today's lecture will cover the introduction and chapter 1 of Monaghan and Just, Social and Cultural Anthropology, a very brief introduction. Join me. Whether or not you've opened the reading yet, here are some key terms to focus your attention. Please think about how these terms and theories might apply to culture and society that you live within, as well as the systems that operate and control human beings' lives. I encourage you also to think about how the theorists and ideas presented overlap within other disciplines. For example, Carl Linnaeus's idea of taxonomy of living things appears in biology. We will talk more about this as we move forward. A quick note on other ages of discovery. Ancient people have spread across the world to populate unpopulated pieces of land for hundreds of thousands of years. From Australia to Indonesia to South Asia to New Zealand, people discovered new lands, animals, and environments. However, their motives differed, and unlike the European age of discovery, which was prompted in part by commercial and scientific endeavors, ancient people were guided by other factors of survival, some of which we will never, ever know. The Muslim age of discovery began in the Middle East after Islam was established as a religion in 610 CE. After that, explorers began to leave the Middle East in the area which is now known as Saudi Arabia in the 900s, where they went to Central Asia and North Africa. Think about Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Egypt, Morocco, Western Sahara. Those are heavily dominated by Islam. The Atlas Catalan map, which was established and created in 1375, shows the route taken by Mansa Musa, the king of the Malayan Empire, or Malian Empire. He traveled from West Africa to Mecca to do the Holy Pilgrimage, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And when he did that, he was also discovering the lands across between in the Maghrib, which is called the West. The Maghrib is the Arabic word for the West. And Mansa Musa, as a Muslim, he was making discoveries of his own and finding out what was between his empire all the way in the west part of Africa and to Saudi Arabia. And in so doing, he traveled with a long caravan of with his entourage as well as slaves. And when he got to Saudi Arabia, the people there were so impressed with his culture and the riches because even the lowest of slaves was dressed in gold. And so he showed the richness of West Africa. We also have, and that was like 1307 to 1332. That's how long his mission was. And then Ibn Battuta, the Arab chronicler, also visited Mali. Based on the pilgrimage that Mansa Musa had taken, to bring back more knowledge to his area in the Middle East. And then he visited India and Europe to again bring knowledge and discover things that would be useful for the empire. One last tangent about the ages of discovery. East Asians also discovered lands and recorded them. The Korean Gunganido map was created in 1492, and it helped Asians navigate the seas for trade and diplomacy. If you correct the map for longitude, because right now it's like Africa is really tiny and Asia is much larger. And they focused because their main way, their bias, let's say, of maps was about latitude. So if you correct for longitude, it actually would expand the area of Africa, which is this, I'll show you with a little red. That is the continent of Africa. So if you were to make it longer, it would actually correct Africa to a better size that is more true to its actual area. So there's that, showing possible trade routes and important areas within the known world. And then second, you have Zheng He, who was an explorer and diplomat that led expeditions under the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty, just as a note, it lasted from 1368 to 1644. And that Zheng He led fleets of ships to Southeast Asia and East Africa, again, to establish relations. He was of the Chinese Hui minority, and the Hui are Muslim people, so it nicely connects with the previous Muslim discovery. The reading also mentions natural and life sciences. So Carl Linnaeus, born in Sweden, enrolled in university to study medicine after becoming a doctor who specialized in treating syphilis. While studying medicine, he began classifying all manners of life forms in Systema Naturae, the book that he published. Charles Darwin set out on a 5-year expedition in 1831 to visit and collect specimens from 4 continents, natural selection and the survival of the fittest. On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, which was published in 1859, Darwin argued that life forms are influenced by their environment and adapt through evolution and change. He implied that human beings had evolved from apes. Geology, Charles Lyell was a lawyer and geologist who wrote and published The Principles of Geology from Ruminations of a Scottish Farmer, James Hutton, that promised that the Earth's surface changes were slow-moving and recognizable, as opposed to random, unimaginable catastrophes. This was called uniformitarianism. And finally, Captain James Cook. He was an explorer captain that landed the first British vessel in Australia, and he mapped the Pacific. All of these men of means had their biases, and in so doing, they set up a system because they had the power to publish and spread their information far and wide. They had influences on social sciences as well as a wide range of people that were going to read their writings and study them. And so this is some of the things that have laid the foundation for how the world is today. In the beginning, anthropologists studied small-scale, simple societies to find out what human life was like for the ancestors, and to find out how societies developed, because it was believed that these savages, these primitive people, they were living these pure lives where the institutions could be studied in their purest form, as if the people in Samoa or the people in the newer kingdom of Africa, that those societies might have been linked in some way. What they didn't understand is each particular community developed in its own kind of isolated manner according to the resources and the things around them, or the things they didn't have around them, right? So just because the newer in kind of North Central Africa were developing ways of being, it would probably have nothing to do with the way Kwakiutl people in the Pacific Northwest had to do, because they live very different environments. And so they're responding to very different weather patterns, very different flora and fauna. Also maybe very different people that are coming in, like other people, their neighbors or enemies that are coming in and interacting with them. Nevertheless, anthropologists wanted also to explain, hey, why are human beings and societies so different than how we are as Europeans, right? Not to say that all Europeans are the same. However, they just wanted to know why the people that they were colonizing were so different from themselves. Why did they look different? Another thing, anthropologists wanted to know the essential, elementary, primitive forms of human institutions. Like I said before, law, government, family, economics, education, art, etc., etc. And then they also used anthropology as a tool. Governments used anthropology as a tool to fill the gaps of Western man's search for understanding themselves, but also to establish control of territories for their governments by proving their superiority over the savages and learning all the information that they could about these primitive people, so that they could use that information as winning over the hearts and minds, but also as like weaponizing that knowledge against them on how to take them over and how to like assimilate them into believing that, hey, you guys need to be Christianized, y'all need to be industrialized. So that is the beginning. Those are the foundation of anthropology. However, since then it has changed a whole lot. But wealthy men of European origins developed various definitions. Sir Edward Bernard Tyler was a British anthropologist, an armchair anthropologist, so he just kind of sat around and in a chair had items and diaries and goods brought to him, and then classified people based on those items. However, even though he didn't travel very much, one of the things he did do was establish one of the best definitions of culture that is continuously used to today. And what he said is that culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Man being like a human, right? And he wrote this in 1871 in his published piece called Primitive Culture. And another thing about Tyler that is still used to this day is that he recognized the earliest form of belief system and worldview called animism. And animism basically is the idea that every thing is imbued with some sort of life force. And that life force is cognizant and can have free will. So a rock could have free will, the wind blowing, and therefore early human beings would pray to those things to get favor, or they would do ceremonies in order to ward off the malevolent energies of the things the natural things that they might be afraid of, and that could be animals, plants, or like lightning. So animism. Thanks, Tyler. So field work used to be a little bit more specific to anthropology. Nowadays, people do field work like in a whole bunch of disciplines. But Monaghan and Just point out that anthropologists are always anthropologists of something and then of somewhere. So like for me, for instance, I'm an anthropologist of identity and education. And my somewhere is South Africa. And so most anthropologists go out into the field, and those that don't, usually maybe they study things from like within the cyber world, right? Because you can stay at home and be like an anthropologist of the internet, an anthropologist of Twitter, right? And anthropology, is basically the study of human beings, but it's more about what the people do, how the people live. It's also about how people communicate, because there's always some sort of communication, and how all these ways of doing things have evolved and changed over time. Because any ethnography, any field work or journal is historically specific, historic particularism, because what I studied 10 years ago is going to be very different than how it is today. And regardless of the subfield that the researcher studies, the anthropologist needs to find out ways to connect with the people. So the archaeologist needs to connect with local scholars and local experts to understand the pre-existing knowledge and important sites for where they might dig and find something. The linguist and the sociocultural anthropologist need to connect with locals to understand vocabulary, syntax, human relationships within the community. And then the biocultural anthropologist similarly needs to connect with people that will help them find the places to find various primates or understand local ways of doing things, and then how they might have changed over time. In the case of sociocultural and linguistic anthropology, one lone researcher goes into the field, typically not of their own home or native culture, although that is changing and has changed over the few decades. Those researchers spend an extended amount of time in the field, anywhere between 6 months and 2 years, and they conduct participant observation, or they observe life, just observation, strict observation, where they take lots of notes. It is this openness to the serendipitous discovery that gives the ethnographic method strength and flexibility not generally available to highly deductive social science methods such as survey or statistical research. The other strength of anthropology is that they have to find informants. And in finding informants that are voluntary, they need to establish rapport. So the researcher develops a unique set of relationships with the people he or she studies, with the host institutions and governments, and with colleagues in the field. They collect information about life, they do interviews, and they record, so that when they go home to the office, to the university, they're able to refresh their memories by going through this information and then creating a picture of a particular place and time, historical specificity, ethnic specificity, community specificity, right? Because over time, that is going to change. And so we're just getting a snapshot of a people. Once all that information is collected, the anthropologist creates an ethnography. Let's break down the word. Ethno, what does it mean? Focus on ethnicity. Graph means writing. Thus, an ethnography is writing about a specific ethnic group. And this is a particular genre of writing that is comprehensive study of a culture in a particular, like I said, time and space, that it is ministered by a lone researcher. Sometimes there are times when a couple or a team of researchers work together, but in the beginning, it's usually one community, one researcher. In contemporary ethnographies, the researcher is reflective, meaning they situate themselves in the time and the place to reveal any subjective biases they may hold. so that the reader can see the methods and what's available to that particular person, and see that the thing that they're writing about and the stories that they tell might be different from what another one might establish and might have privy to. So the ethnography is incomplete without cross-cultural comparisons, which allow the uniqueness of the ethnographic description to find a comparative spatial and temporal context, according to Monaghan and Just. This is not to say that statistical data is not used in an ethnography. However, it is not the main focus. Telling the story from the perspective of the people, the community they are working with, is the prime focus. And an anatomy of the ethnography and description. Ethnographies are about description, setting the scene, the when and the where, the geography, the scenery, the smells, the history, the socialization, the social organization, the social, familial, political, global, economic, the language relationships within that community, within the surrounding community, and then the theory, a coherent group of tested general proposition commonly regarded as correct that can be used as the principle of explanation and prediction for a class of phenomena such as structural violence, racism, human sexuality spectrum. And then there is the methods, the how. How did this researcher get to collect all this data? And then the evidence. How is that evidence showing the theory is valid, right? And then the conclusion, how it all comes together, and the conclusion can also encompass what was left out and further steps that can be taken by either that researcher themselves, like their plan for the future, or researchers beyond, right? Like the mentees that they might be working with or other interested parties, so that it allows a continuous stream of inquiry, and it opens the door for new projects to arise within that same framework. So some ethical dilemmas specific to anthropology. Napoleon Chagnon. Um, he was a researcher in the 60s in South America, the Amazon specifically, and he studied the Yanomami people in Brazil. He was accused by journalists for exacerbating violence, staging for films and for data, and to participate in biomedical expedition that may have caused or worsened a measles epidemic, resulting in the death of many of the people in the community. One of his quotes is, "I looked up and gasped when I saw a dozen burly, naked, filthy, hideous men staring at us down the shafts of their drawn arrows." Again, for effect, right? Because we know that sensationalism sells. And so this was part of his ethical concerns of his research. Laud Humphrey is another researcher in the 70s with the Tea Room Sex Study, where he had tasked himself with analyzing anonymous informal sexual encounters between men, regardless of their self-identified sexual status, being bisexual, heterosexual, or homosexual. Humphrey began to conceal his identity to prevent response bias, because in his thought, if the informants or participants knew that he was a researcher, they would alter their responses. So he was trying to get the unadulterated information from people. However, they didn't know that they were participating in a study, so they might not have told him some of the things. Again, that's why it's so important to establish a trusted relationship with people and establish that rapport, so that people will feel comfortable with you, and they will believe in science, and they will continuously tell people that, hey, this is legitimate, and these researchers are legitimate, they're ethical, and they do the best to protect people, number one, right? Another issue is Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which was established in 1990. Many biological anthropologists and archaeologists use the collection from the ancestors of living people, and they take and remove the remains of the ancestors without the people's consent. The ancestors cannot give consent, but they don't get the consent of the communities that are descended from them. So in 1996, Kennewick Man is a great example of that involved this NAGPRA case. So Kennewick Man was found in a cave in Washington State. It was determined through carbon dating to be 9,000 years old, and controversy exploded over whether that person was a descendant of the local First Nations people or whether he was from somewhere else. The local indigenous people claimed that this is our ancestor, we need this person back, whereas the researchers said, no, there's no possible way, y'all have been here that long, and there's no possible way that this person belongs to you, so we need it for our research and we need it for our experiments. Needless to say, more testing was done, and it was found that the Kennewick Man was actually shared the DNA of the local indigenous people. And so the courts, because this ended up in a long court battle, the courts ended up siding with the indigenous people. And then finally, an issue of disrespecting people's cultural and individual privacy, what's on record versus what's off record. William Fenton was an example, and I mentioned this because William Fenton was an anthropologist who established really deep trust between the researcher and the community in question, Iroquois people. And so because there was this rapport that was developed between the community and the researcher, a lot of the community revealed a lot of sensitive information that they didn't necessarily want to share. And they allowed William Fenton to take pictures of sacred items. And the first thing he did, maybe not the first thing, but one of the things that he did that really affected the community negatively, that broke the trust between them, is he published the secrets. So there's good and bad about this. The bad part is that he broke the trust of his participants and people that he had established these long relationships with. On the other hand, he did such a good job of recording things that people still use that book as a reference. Like, community members use that book as a reference to collect the knowledge. So, that's why people had to change their ways, right? And so beginning in the late 1970s, people started figuring and making plans to solve these research ethical dilemmas. And what happened was an internal review board was established to make sure to review the plans of researchers so that anyone who was working with live human beings or the things that human beings were attached to. This could be human remains or cultural material, that they would get informed consent of the communities and individuals with whom they were working with. So the IRB, for short, was used to determine risk, reward, or benefit of proposed study. Any researcher that does work with human beings must submit a research plan that addresses the risk-reward analysis for the people that participate in the study, because all of this is volunteer, right? There's supposed to be no coercion, no bribes, no gifts giving. That's not to say when you establish a relationship with somebody that you're not going to give gifts, but in order to make sure that nobody is, like, the research is as objective as it could be, participants are strictly voluntary and not paid. Anyway, researchers are required to submit all the questions that they're going to ask the people and a plan on how they will protect the information that they accumulate from those voluntary participants. Now, you don't necessarily have to publish all of that stuff, so let's go back to the example of William Fenton, who collected all this amazing information about the material objects and the spiritual practices of the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse, aka Iroquois, but he didn't have to publish on them, right? Because people could have told him things in confidence and he could have just held on to that information. And then, when he was going to leave this earthly realm, he could have taken that information and passed it on to a trusted community member. He didn't have to just put it out there for everyone to consume. And that's a way that people, have developed ways of thinking and sharing the information. Anyway, this information, the plans, the questionnaires, are all reviewed by an independent group of researchers to advise if there are any changes that need to be made to protect the participants and the information that the participants give them, because a lot of times the information is very sensitive and we want to do no harm. Just as doctors want to do no harm, yoga instructors want to participate in ahimsa, do no harm, anthropology researchers also strive to do no harm. So allowing, another thing is allowing diversity in the field from women, people of color, Native anthropologists, people of diverse sexual orientations to participate, and nationalities. Because people that fall outside of the dominant culture, their worldviews and the way they see things are different from people that are centrally located within the dominant culture. And so they bring new questions, they bring new ideas. So encouraging people of these other identities to participate and establish plans is another way to kind of move away from these different problems within the discipline. And then another thing is allowing community participants and individuals to speak for themselves by opening up venues that allow for multi-vocality, right? So that there's many voices coming within and it's just not one researcher voice. Because a lot of times when you have a researcher, a professor, like somebody who is supposed to be of high status, let's say, there is a power dynamic that makes people feel uncomfortable or feel like they have to participate, that they're pressured. And if we go back to the Milgram experiment with the ideas of ordinary people submitting to the requests of people that are higher up than them, anthropologists try to eliminate that. And so allowing individuals a space within the community and outside the community to have a voice for themselves and to participate and to be called up as experts. That is another way to help right the wrongs of the methods in the past. Another issue that came up was in the reading, and that has come up over the years, is who does the anthropologist owe their allegiance to? So, for instance, an embedded anthropologist working in war zones or for the government to help win a war. If, let's say, there's a person working in Afghanistan, let's say during the Afghanistan war, and they are situated there to collect information about the Taliban. Do they owe their allegiance to the Taliban, or do they owe their allegiance to collect the sensitive information and give it to the government that is fighting a war against them? It's tricky to say sometimes, right? If you come across a cultural practice that is harming people, are you supposed to say something? Are you supposed to try to change them? Or are you like one of those videographers that do those beautiful and amazing videos of like lions stalking a gazelle, and you have empathy for the gazelle because you're like, oh my gosh, you're going to get eaten and you're such a beautiful animal, and do you let that lion eat the gazelle, or do you intervene in some way? There's no right or wrong answer. It's just, what are your ethics? Another one is anthropologists working for private corporations. For instance, Unilever is a large global company, and they have everything from soap to diet pills and just ordinary like potato chips. So in Unilever, they had researchers go into the Kalahari Desert and work with the indigenous people of Southern Africa to find out about this hoodia thing, because hoodia is a plant, and you can see the image right here that I'm circling with the red of a Khoisan man and the hoodia plant right there. So because they live in the desert, they and there's not always a lot of food around or resources, it's kind of scarce. In order to keep themselves healthy and mentally and physically, they eat this hoodia plant, and it controls their appetite and their hunger pangs, so that they're able to track game a little bit longer, and they're able to have stamina. Anyway, it was found that this plant could be very useful to Western communities, Western people that suffer from, overeating calories. And so hoodia became a tool. So this indigenous knowledge, these IKS, indigenous knowledge systems of Hoodia was then like taken um, by a researcher, and the company that was promoting the study took that information and began to market it. Actually, Oprah Winfrey um, took some of that those supplements in order to lose weight, because if you do or do not know, Oprah Winfrey suffered. She did like yo-yo. Her weight yo-yoed, right? It went up and down, and so she was always trying to look out for a new solution, because she also had interest in South Africa. She gravitated to this plant to control her weight, and Unilever, being the giant global company that it is, they wanted to market it, extract the resources, market it, and then make money off of it. So again, who does the researcher, even though like a private company is funding your research, the information that the researcher might provide, the companies, might really harm the indigenous people, or might harm the people where the knowledge is coming from. Because in the end, what ended up happening was the Hoodia plant, they extracted so much of it that there was no more for the indigenous people to consume. And so again, this ethical dilemma of like, who do you owe your allegiance to? There's no right or wrong. It's just a like critical thinking question that people need to go through and manage with their conscious. So today, anthropology in the 20th century, it shifted, and so it became through these initiatives like IRB and multivocality, it became a humanistic approach, right? So you have comparative studies that approach all societies as if they are all equally important and complex in their own ways, and one is not better or worse than another. So here are some examples of readings that we are going to encounter through the rest of this semester that shift focus away from non-Western small-scale societies to urbanized, globalized cultures that are and transnational corporations and political organizations. So the first one, that kind of ethnography that we're going to be reading, is Burnished. That is actually written by an art historian, but she used anthropology methods. And this focuses on Zulu ceramics between rural and urban South Africa. And it looks at historic moments of this material culture and how it has changed over time. Another one we will be reading is The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. Again, this is not necessarily written by an anthropologist. However, it's a journalist, and there's many overlapping methods that people have taken from anthropology. And if we look down at the little cartoon on the left-hand side at the bottom, it shows a trajectory, fields arranged by purity. I thought it was cute. So you have sociologist to the very left, and then moving along the way. You have psychologists, sociology of it's just applied psychology. Psychology is just applied biology. Biology is just applied chemistry, which is just applied physics. It's nice to be on top, say the physicists. And then the mathematicians are in their own kind of little realm. So my question to you guys is, where would you place anthropology? And then the last actually thing that is written by an anthropologist is Shirts Powdered Red, and this focuses on the Haudenosaunee and their ideas of clothing and how it differs from the Europeans, and how those two kind of came into each other as there was culture contact in the 1600s and moving up to the 1900s. In Search of Respect is an awesome ethnography that I encourage everyone to kind of take a look at, and it's about crack dealers in East Harlem in the 1980s. But again, like crack, oh my God, what an awful subject. But the author does a wonderful job of being non-bias and presenting this community as a legitimate culture that doesn't have any bias and treats them as like as they would, the Zulu people or Iroquois people, Haudenosaunee people, without any judgment. And being as objective as possible. And then one last thing, in being objective, they say there is reflexivity. So the researchers explain themselves and their positionality in the field so that the readers can really see any pitfalls that might be within the research. So to conclude, anthropology was developed as a result of human exploration in conjunction with the natural sciences and colonialism encountering the other. Anthropology was also developed out of a desire for wealthy European men to understand themselves and control the world and its resources. It did not always, as a discipline, it did not always operate ethically when working with other people who they deemed as their subjects rather than participants or informants. And that's also why in the late 20th century, there was a shift from calling people subjects to be governed, to calling people the volunteers that participated in the study as participants, informants, or even co-scientists or co-producers of a work. And then these shifts also made anthropology research more ethical and inclusive. Finally, here are some questions to think about. And I'll present a big question for you in the online discussion post that will be due. And then finally, here is a list of all the sources that were presented within this video. So please, I'll create links within this YouTube panel where you can just click on them if you want to explore a little bit more. Thank you so much for spending some time with me, and I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I really hope you guys check out some of these resources because they might come in handy when you're doing your own work and your own ethnographies. Thank you and have a wonderful day.